Sunday service in black churches during the 1960s through 1980s was never just about worship. It was about fellowship, and fellowship meant food. After the final hymn and the benediction, families would gather in the church basement or fellowship hall, where folding tables groaned under the weight of dishes brought from home. Each family had their signature contribution, the dish everyone expected and waited for. These weren't just meals. They were expressions of love, tradition, and community pride. Recipes passed down through generations appeared week after week, creating a culinary tapestry that told the story of Black Southern heritage, migration, and resilience. But what were those unforgettable dishes that made church potlucks the highlight of every Sunday? 1. Sister Johnson's perfectly golden fried chicken. No church potluck was complete without Sister Johnson arriving with her large aluminum pan covered in foil, steam still rising from the crispy chicken pieces inside. She would arrive early, having spent Saturday evening seasoning the chicken with her secret blend of spices and Sunday morning frying batch after batch in her cast iron skillets. The chicken was always perfectly golden, with a crust that crackled when you bit into it and meat so tender it fell off the bone. Children would hover near her table, hoping to snag a drumstick before the blessing was even said. This was not just fried chicken. It was a demonstration of culinary mastery that Sister Johnson had learned from her grandmother in rural Georgia. The way she controlled the heat of her oil, the exact moment she knew to flip each piece, the careful balance of seasonings. These were skills honed over decades. When families praised her chicken, they were acknowledging not just the taste, but the tradition and expertise she carried forward. In many black churches, the women known for their fried chicken held a special status. Their contribution, both expected and celebrated week after week. 2. Deacon Brown's barbecue ribs with his special sauce. Deacon Brown took his rib duty seriously, often starting his preparation on Saturday afternoon in the backyard. His neighbors would smell the hickory smoke drifting through the alley as he slow-cooked racks of ribs over charcoal, basting them with his homemade sauce that he guarded like a family secret. By Sunday morning, those ribs were falling off the bone tender, glazed with a sauce that was the perfect balance of tangy, sweet, and just a little bit spicy. He would transport them in his wife's roasting pans, carefully wrapped to keep them warm during the service. These ribs represented more than good cooking. They were a connection to Southern barbecue traditions that many black families carried with them during the Great Migration. Deacon Brown's father had been a pitmaster in Alabama, and every time he served those ribs at church, he was honoring that legacy. Men would gather around his table, discussing his technique and trying to guess his sauce ingredients, while kids would gnaw on the bones long after the meat was gone. The ribs were a centerpiece, a dish that brought people together and sparked conversations about home, family, and the old ways of doing things. 3. Mother Williams macaroni and cheese. Mother Williams arrived with her enormous glass Pyrex dish, the kind that required 2 hands and careful maneuvering through the church door. Her macaroni and cheese was legendary. Baked until the top formed a golden brown crust with slightly crispy edges, while the inside remained creamy and rich. She used a blend of sharp cheddar and Velveeta, evaporated milk, and whole eggs, creating a texture that was neither too dry nor too soupy, but absolutely perfect. The dish would be gone within minutes of the food line opening, with families hoping to grab a corner piece where the cheese had caramelized against the pan. This macaroni and cheese was soul food at its finest, a dish that had evolved from simple pasta to a cornerstone of black culinary tradition. Mother Williams had learned the recipe from her aunt, who had learned it from her mother, each generation adding their own touch. When families ate her macaroni and cheese, they were tasting history, the way black cooks had taken simple, affordable ingredients and transformed them into something magnificent. Children who grew up eating her dish would later try to recreate it in their own kitchens, calling her for advice and rarely achieving quite the same result. For the Davis family's collard greens. The Davis family brought their collard greens in a massive pot, still warm from the stove, the lid secured with aluminum foil and kitchen towels. These greens had been cooking since Saturday night, slow-simmered with smoked turkey necks, onions, and just the right amount of vinegar and red pepper flakes. The pot liquor at the bottom was rich and flavorful, and families would ladle it over their cornbread. Mr. Davis would proudly serve the greens, making sure everyone got some of the tender meat from the turkey necks along with their portion of greens. Collard greens at church potlucks were about more than nutrition. They were a symbol of Black Southern heritage and the art of making something wonderful from humble ingredients. The Davis family had been bringing greens to church for 3 generations, and their preparation method remained largely unchanged. Young people would watch Mrs. Davis clean and chop the greens, learning the proper way to remove the tough stems and cut the leaves into ribbons. These greens connected families to their agricultural past, to grandparents who had grown collards in their gardens, and to a tradition of slow cooking that modern life was beginning to leave behind. 5. Sister Martin's candied yams. Sister Martin's candied yams arrived in a deep casserole dish, the top glistening with brown sugar glaze and dotted with miniature marshmallows that had toasted to golden perfection. She used fresh sweet potatoes, never canned, slicing them thick and layering them with butter, brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and a splash of vanilla extract. The dish baked until the yams were tender and the syrup had thickened into a rich, sticky coating. Families would fight over the pieces from the corners where the glaze had caramelized into candy-like clusters. These candied yams were a bridge between everyday meals and holiday feasts, bringing a taste of Thanksgiving to ordinary Sundays. Sister Martin's recipe came from her childhood in South Carolina, where her family had grown their own sweet potatoes and preserved them in a root cellar through the winter. When she made these yams for the church family, she was sharing not just food, but a piece of her history. Children who claimed to dislike vegetables would eagerly fill their plates with her yams, the sweetness making them acceptable, while adults appreciated the way the dish honored traditional Southern cooking. 6. Brother Mitchell's smothered pork chops. Brother Mitchell's smothered pork chops were a work of art. Thick-cut chops braised until fork tender in a rich brown gravy loaded with onions. He would sear the chops, first to lock in the flavor, then simmer them low and slow in a mixture of chicken broth, onions, garlic, and seasonings until the gravy thickened into a silky sauce. The dish arrived at church in a deep pan, the gravy still bubbling slightly, and families would spoon that gravy over everything on their plates. Rice, potatoes, even their greens. This dish represented the soul food tradition of taking tougher, less expensive cuts of meat and transforming them through slow cooking and proper seasoning. Brother Mitchell had learned this technique from his mother, who had fed a family of 8 on a limited budget by making dishes that stretched and satisfied. At church, his pork chops were a reminder that good cooking was not about expensive ingredients, but about skill, patience, and love. Men would seek him out after the meal to talk about cooking techniques, and young fathers would ask for tips on making gravy, creating a space for men to engage in culinary conversation. 7. Sister Robinson's potato salad. Sister Robinson's potato salad was so anticipated that families would arrive early to make sure they got some before it ran out. She made it the traditional way. Boiled red potatoes cut into large chunks, plenty of chopped hard-boiled eggs, sweet pickle relish, yellow mustard, and Duke's mayonnaise, all mixed together and seasoned with paprika and a touch of sugar. The salad had to be made fresh the night before to allow the flavors to meld, and she always prepared enough to fill her largest Tupperware bowl. By the time the food line formed, people were already planning how much to take. Potato salad in black churches was serious business, and Sister Robinson's version had achieved legendary status. The dish represented the subtle art of balancing flavors and textures. Potatoes that held their shape but were tender enough to melt in your mouth, just enough pickle for tang without overwhelming the creamy base, and that hint of sweetness that set hers apart. Women would study her salad, trying to figure out her proportions, but she insisted there was no recipe, just feel and experience. Children grew up eating her potato salad at every church function, and decades later would remember that exact taste as the standard by which all other potato salads were judged. 8. The Henderson family's green beans. The Henderson family brought green beans that had been slow cooked with chunks of ham hock until the beans were tender and infused with smoky flavor. These were not the crisp, bright green beans of modern cooking. These were beans that had been simmered for hours until they reached that perfect soft texture, swimming in a flavorful pot liquor seasoned with onions, garlic, and black pepper. Mrs. Henderson would serve them with a slotted spoon, making sure everyone got some of the meat along with their beans. And people would often take extra just for the cooking liquid to pour over their rice. These green beans connected church families to agricultural traditions and the art of cooking with pork. The Henderson family had roots in rural North Carolina, where growing and preserving beans had been essential to survive in the winter. Their church preparation honored those traditions while providing a dish that complemented almost everything else on the potluck table. Young people would watch Mr. Henderson talk about the importance of properly seasoning the pot and cooking low and slow, lessons that applied to much more than just green beans. The dish was a reminder that some of the best food required time and patience, values that resonated with the church community's broader teachings. 9. Sister Cooper's cornbread dressing. Sister Cooper's cornbread dressing was a Thanksgiving-worthy dish that appeared at church potlucks year-round. She started by baking pans of cornbread and letting them dry out for a day, then crumbling them and mixing them with sautéed celery, onions, sage, and chicken broth until the mixture reached the perfect consistency, moist but not mushy, with some crispy edges after baking. She added chopped boiled eggs and plenty of black pepper, creating a dressing that was savory, comforting, and deeply satisfying. Families would take generous portions, and many would specifically seek out those crispy edges from the corners of the pan. This dressing represented the way black cooks elevated simple ingredients into something special. Sister Cooper had learned the recipe from her mother-in-law, who had made it for church homecomings in rural Mississippi. The dish connected families to their southern roots and to the tradition of communal meals, where everyone contributed their best. Children who grew up eating her dressing would later beg for the recipe when they moved away from home, trying to recreate that specific combination of flavors and textures that meant church and community and belonging. The dressing was never just a side dish. It was a main attraction that people planned their plates around. 10. Brother Washington's chitlins. Not every family partook, but Brother Washington's chitlins were a polarizing dish that divided the congregation. Those who loved them would make a beeline for his table, while those who didn't would give it a wide berth. He prepared them meticulously, cleaning them thoroughly over several rinses before boiling them with onions, garlic, bay leaves, and vinegar until tender. The smell was unmistakable and filled the fellowship hall, a scent that was either comforting or off-putting depending on one's upbringing. He served them with hot sauce and vinegar on the side, and his fans would load their plates while discussing the lost art of chitlin preparation. Chitlins at church represented a connection to the most profound aspects of black culinary history, making food from parts that others discarded, transforming the least desirable cuts into something valued within the community. Brother Washington's willingness to bring chitlins to church was a statement about honoring the past and refusing to forget where families came from. Older members would tell stories about growing up eating chitlins, about the communal chitlin cleaning parties where women gathered to prepare them together, about the way this humble food had sustained families through hard times. The dish sparked conversations about heritage, memory, and the importance of preserving traditions even as they became less common. 11. Sister Lewis 7-layer salad. Sister Lewis brought her famous 7-layer salad in a large glass trifle bowl, showing off the beautiful layers like a work of art. From bottom to top, iceberg lettuce, diced celery, chopped bell peppers, frozen green peas thawed, sharp cheddar cheese, crumbled bacon, and a thick layer of Hellmann's mayonnaise spread over the top like frosting and sprinkled with more cheese. The salad had to be made the night before so the flavors could meld together. And when she served it, she would make sure to dig deep so everyone got all 7 layers in their portion. It was cold, creamy, crunchy, and unlike anything else on the table. This salad was a product of the 1970s and early 1980s, when layered salads became popular at gatherings across America, but Sister Lewis's version became a church staple. The dish represented a moment when black families were incorporating new cooking trends while maintaining their own culinary identity. Children loved the salad because of its mild flavors and fun layers, while adults appreciated how it provided a cool contrast to the hot, rich dishes that dominated the table. The clear glass bowl made the salad a visual centerpiece, and Sister Lewis took pride in the presentation, understanding that food at church was about more than taste. It was about showing care and effort for the community. 12. Deacon Thompson's baked beans. Deacon Thompson's baked beans were a sweet and savory masterpiece, slow-cooked with brown sugar, molasses, yellow mustard, ketchup, and chunks of bacon and ground beef. He would start with dried navy beans that he had soaked overnight, then layer them in his large cast iron Dutch oven with the seasonings and meat, letting everything bake together for hours until the beans were tender and the sauce had thickened into a rich, sticky coating. The top would develop a caramelized crust that people fought over, and the beans themselves were plump and flavorful, each one having absorbed the sweet, smoky taste of the sauce. These beans were a lesson in patience and the rewards of slow cooking. Deacon Thompson would tell anyone who asked that good baked beans couldn't be rushed. They needed time in the oven for all the flavors to come together properly. His recipe came from his time in the military, where he had learned to cook for large groups, but he had adapted it over the years to suit church potlucks. Young men in the congregation would watch him dish out portions, hoping to learn his technique, understanding that being able to cook a signature dish was a form of service to the community. The beans appeared at every summer potluck and church picnic, a reliable presence that families counted on. 13. Sister Hayes Peach Cobbler. Sister Hayes Peach Cobbler arrived still warm from the oven, the crust golden and slightly crispy on top, the fruit bubbling underneath. She made it in a large rectangular pan, using either fresh peaches in summer or canned ones during other seasons, layering them with sugar, cinnamon, and butter before topping them with a biscuit-like crust that baked into a perfect combination of crispy and tender. The cobbler would be served with a large spoon, and people would ask for the corner pieces where the crust had gotten extra crispy. Some families would bring vanilla ice cream from home specifically to top their portion of Sister Hayes cobbler. This cobbler was the bridge between the main meal and dessert, often the first sweet dish to disappear from the table. Sister Hayes had learned to make it from her grandmother in rural Alabama, where peach trees grew in the backyard and summer meant preserving peaches for winter cobblers. When she made it for church, she was continuing that tradition and sharing a taste of southern summers with her church family. Children who ate her cobbler would remember that combination of sweet fruit and buttery crust for the rest of their lives, and many would later try to recreate it, calling her for advice on the right crust texture and fruit-to-sugar ratio. 14. Brother James' red beans and rice. Brother James brought his red beans and rice in a massive pot, the beans cooked until creamy and thick, ladled over white rice that he brought separately. He made it the New Orleans way. Red kidney beans slow-cooked with smoked sausage, ham hocks, the holy trinity of onion, celery, and bell peppers, along with garlic, bay leaves, and Creole seasoning. The beans had to cook for hours until some of them broke down and created a thick, creamy sauce that coated the others. He would serve generous portions, making sure everyone got plenty of sausage and meat, and people would often go back for seconds because the dish was so satisfying and filling. This dish connected the church to the broader Black Southern and Creole culinary traditions, particularly the Monday tradition of cooking red beans while doing laundry. Brother James had grown up in Louisiana before moving north, and his beans carried the authentic taste of New Orleans home cooking. At church, his red beans became a way of sharing his heritage with the congregation and teaching others about the importance of proper seasoning and slow cooking. Young people would ask him about Creole cooking, and he would explain the differences between Creole and Cajun food, the importance of the Trinity, and the way good red beans should be creamy without being mushy. His dish sparked conversations about regional differences within Black Southern cuisine. 15. Sister Green's fried fish. Sister Green specialized in fried fish, usually whiting or catfish, coated in a seasoned cornmeal crust and fried until golden and crispy. She would arrive with multiple pans of fish, still warm and wrapped in paper towels to absorb excess oil. The fish had been seasoned with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and cayenne before being dredged in cornmeal mixed with flour, creating crust that was crunchy and flavorful. She served it with lemon wedges and hot sauce on the side, and families would pile the fish on their plates, often eating it with their hands while standing around the table talking. Fried fish at church potlucks represented the tradition of Friday fish fries in black communities and the importance of seafood in black southern and coastal cuisines. Sister Green had grown up in coastal South Carolina, where her father and brothers had been fishermen, and frying fish was as natural to her as breathing. Her technique, the right oil temperature, the proper coating, the timing, was the result of decades of experience. When she brought fish to church, she was sharing a piece of her coastal heritage with an inland congregation, many of whom had migrated from different parts of the South. The fish sparked memories and conversations about different regional ways of preparing seafood. 16. The young family's cabbage. The young family's cabbage was simple but perfect. Chopped cabbage cooked down with onions, smoked turkey, and just enough seasoning to make it flavorful without overwhelming the vegetable's natural sweetness. They cooked it until it was tender but not mushy, with a little bit of the cooking liquid left in the bottom of the pan to keep it moist. The cabbage would arrive in a large covered dish, and families would take generous portions, appreciating the way it provided a lighter, fresher option among the richer dishes. Children who normally turned their noses up at cabbage would eat the young family's version without complaint. This cabbage represented the art of cooking vegetables properly, something that many black cooks excelled at, but that often went unappreciated. Mrs. Young had learned from her grandmother that vegetables deserved the same care and attention as meat dishes, that they needed proper seasoning and cooking time to reach their potential. Her cabbage was never an afterthought. It was a deliberate contribution that she took pride in. The dish connected families to the tradition of cooking fresh vegetables and the importance of including greens and vegetables in every meal. Young wives would ask her for cooking advice, and she would explain that the secret was not to rush, to let the cabbage cook down slowly until it reached that perfect texture. 17. Sister Butler's Pound Cake. Sister Butler's pound cake was a masterpiece of simplicity. Butter, sugar, eggs, flour, and vanilla extract baked into a dense, moist cake with a golden crust. She made it in a tube pan, and when she turned it out onto her cake plate, it stood tall and perfect, with a beautiful golden color and a fine crumb. The cake needed no frosting or embellishment. Its rich butter flavor stood on its own. She would slice it thick and serve it plain or with a dusting of powdered sugar, and families would savor every bite, appreciating the way the cake melted in your mouth and left a lingering buttery taste. This pound cake was a link to traditions that went back generations, to a time when pound cake recipes were called such because they used a pound each of butter, sugar, eggs, and flour. Sister Butler's recipe had been passed down through her family, with small adjustments made by each generation, but the essential character remained the same. When she brought pound cake to church, she was offering a taste of heritage and the result of true baking skill. No box mixes, no shortcuts, just quality ingredients and proper technique. Young bakers would ask for a recipe, and she would share it while cautioning that pound cake was as much about feel and experience as it was about measurements. 18. Brother Anderson's Pig Feet. Brother Anderson's pig feet were not for everyone, but for those who loved them, they were a treasured dish. He cooked them low and slow until the meat was tender and falling off the bone, simmered in a pot with onions, garlic, vinegar, and plenty of seasonings. The feet developed a gelatinous texture from the collagen, creating a rich, sticky sauce that coated everything. He served them with hot sauce and vinegar on the side, and his fans would carefully separate the meat from the bones, savoring every bite while discussing the lost art of preparing these traditional foods. Pig feet at church potlucks were a powerful statement about preserving culinary heritage and refusing to forget the foods that had sustained black families through difficult times. Brother Anderson brought them proudly, understanding that they represented making use of every part of the animal and creating something delicious from what others discarded. Older church members would tell stories about eating pig feet as children, about the way their mothers and grandmothers had prepared them, about the importance of these foods in building community and surviving poverty. The dish sparked intergenerational conversations and helped younger people understand their culinary history, even if they didn't choose to eat the dish themselves. 19. Sister Patterson's Sweet Potato Pie. Sister Patterson's sweet potato pie was legendary. Smooth, creamy filling spiced with cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla, baked in a flaky homemade crust until the center was just set and the edges were lightly browned. She made multiple pies for each potluck, knowing they would disappear quickly. The filling was made from fresh sweet potatoes that she baked, peeled, and mashed herself, mixed with butter, eggs, evaporated milk, and sugar until perfectly smooth. The pies were served at room temperature, cut into generous slices, and families would often take a slice to eat at church and another to take home for later. Sweet potato pie was a cornerstone of Black Southern dessert traditions, and Sister Patterson's version represented the pinnacle of the craft. She had learned pie making from her mother, who had learned from her mother, each generation passing down the techniques of making tender crust and smooth filling. When families ate her pie, they were connecting to generations of Black women who had perfected this dessert, who had made something wonderful from simple, affordable ingredients. The pie appeared at every special occasion, homecomings, anniversaries, holiday celebrations, and its presence signaled that this was an event worth celebrating. Young women would watch her cut the pies, hoping to learn the secret to her perfect crust and velvety filling. 20. Deacon Miller's neck bones. Deacon Miller's neck bones were a hearty, flavorful dish that showcased the art of cooking with less expensive cuts of meat. He would braise the neck bones with onions, garlic, tomato sauce, and plenty of seasonings until the meat was fall off the bone tender and the sauce had thickened into a rich gravy. The dish arrived in a large pot, and he would serve it with a slotted spoon, making sure everyone got plenty of meat along with the bones. Families would eat the neck bones with their hands, working around the bones to get every bit of meat, and they would pour the gravy over rice or potatoes to soak up every drop of flavor. Neck bones at church represented the culinary wisdom of Black cooks who knew how to take humble ingredients and transform them into something delicious and satisfying. Deacon Miller had learned to cook them from his father, who had fed a large family during hard times by making dishes that stretched the budget. At church, his neck bones were a reminder that good food was not about expensive ingredients, but about skill, patience, and knowing how to build flavor. Young fathers would ask him for cooking advice, and he would explain the importance of browning the meat first, of building layers of flavor, of cooking low and slow until everything came together. His dish created a space for men to discuss cooking and caring for family. 21. Sister Montgomery's black-eyed peas. Sister Montgomery's black-eyed peas were a Southern staple, cooked with ham hocks or smoked turkey until the peas were tender and creamy, swimming in a flavorful pot liquor seasoned with onions, garlic, and bay leaves. She always added a little bit of jalapeno for heat, just enough to give the peas a gentle kick without overwhelming them. The dish arrived in a large pot, and she would ladle generous portions into bowls, making sure everyone got some of the meat along with their peas. Families would often eat the peas over rice or with cornbread to soak up the cooking liquid. These black-eyed peas connected church families to New Year's traditions and the symbolism of eating them for good luck. But Sister Montgomery brought them to church throughout the year. Her recipe came from her childhood in rural Georgia, where black-eyed peas were a regular part of the diet and growing them in the garden was a summer ritual. When she made them for church, she was continuing that tradition and sharing a dish that represented both sustenance and hope. Children would hear stories about why black-eyed peas meant good luck, and they would learn about the importance of these legumes in Black Southern agriculture and cooking. The peas were never just a side dish. They were a connection to history and heritage. 22. Brother Louis meatloaf. Brother Louis meatloaf was a crowd pleaser, made with a mixture of ground beef and ground pork, breadcrumbs, eggs, onions, bell peppers, and plenty of seasonings, all mixed together and formed into loaves. He would top them with a tangy ketchup glaze that caramelized as they baked, creating a sweet and savory crust. The meatloaf arrived at church wrapped in foil, still warm, and he would slice it thick, serving it with extra glaze on the side. The texture was perfect, moist and tender, but firm enough to hold together, with a flavor that was rich and satisfying. This meatloaf represented the way Black families had adapted mainstream American dishes and made them their own through seasoning and technique. Brother Louis had learned to make it during his time in the Army, but he had modified the recipe over the years to match his family's tastes. At church, his meatloaf was popular with children and adults alike, a familiar comfort food that everyone enjoyed. Young men would ask him about his recipe, and he would explain the importance of the breadcrumb-to-meat ratio, the way the vegetables kept it moist, and the trick of mixing the meats for better flavor. His willingness to share his knowledge made him a mentor to younger cooks in the congregation. 23. Sister Clark's Bread Pudding. Sister Clark's bread pudding was a dessert that transformed stale bread into something magical. She would cube day-old bread and soak it in a custard mixture of eggs, milk, sugar, vanilla, cinnamon, and nutmeg, then fold in raisins before baking it until golden and set. The pudding emerged from the oven with a crispy top and a custardy interior, and she would serve it warm with a bourbon sauce or vanilla sauce drizzled over the top. The dish was rich, comforting, and utterly satisfying, a perfect ending to the potluck meal. This bread pudding represented the resourcefulness of black cooks who never wasted anything, who could take leftover bread and create a dessert worthy of special occasions. Sister Clark had learned to make it from her mother, who had learned it during her time working in restaurant kitchens where nothing was thrown away. When she brought bread pudding to church, she was sharing a lesson about creativity and making the most of what you had. The dish sparked conversations about the importance of avoiding waste, about the value of knowing how to transform leftovers into something special. Young people would taste it and be surprised that something so delicious could come from stale bread, learning a valuable lesson about cooking and resourcefulness. 24. Deacon Wright's oxtails. Deacon Wright's oxtails were a luxury dish that appeared at special potlucks and celebrations. He would braise them low and slow with onions, carrots, celery, tomato paste, and beef broth until the meat was incredibly tender and falling off the bone, creating a rich, thick gravy. The oxtails would cook for hours, filling the house with an incredible aroma before he transported them to church in a large covered pot. He served them with rice or mashed potatoes to soak up the gravy, and families would savor every bite, working around the bones to get all the meat. These oxtails represented a connection to Caribbean and Southern cooking traditions, where expensive ingredients were treated with the respect and time they deserved. Deacon Wright had grown up in a family where oxtails were reserved for special occasions, and bringing them to church was his way of honoring the congregation and showing love through food. The dish required skill and patience, knowing how to build flavor, how long to cook the meat, how to achieve the perfect consistency for the gravy. Young cooks would watch him serve and ask questions, and he would explain the importance of taking time with food, of not rushing the process. His oxtails were a reminder that some of the best things in life required patience and care. 25. Sister Freeman's Coconut Cake. Sister Freeman's coconut cake was a towering masterpiece. Multiple layers of tender white cake filled and frosted with a fluffy coconut frosting and covered in sweetened shredded coconut. The cake stood tall on her special cake stand, a white mountain that drew admiring looks before anyone even tasted it. The cake was moist and tender, the frosting was sweet but not cloying, and the coconut added texture and flavor to every bite. She would carefully slice the cake, making sure each piece had plenty of coconut coating, and families would eat it slowly, savoring the combination of textures and the skill required to make such a beautiful cake.